Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. I'm delighted to welcome back Adnan Adrian Wood-Smith. You're most welcome, sir. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Great to be here, Paul. We had a great conversation last time, and yeah, I'm excited to be back.
Yep, it's great to have you back. You're kind of an Englishman who's American as well, living in the States, talking to an Englishman who's living in England.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Adnan is an award-winning educator, speaker, and life consultant. He has served as a denominational counselor at Harvard Divinity School, the Muslim chaplain at Brown University, and a faculty member at Zaytuna College, as well as in volunteer positions in correctional facilities, that's American speak for prisons, I think, and various community organizations throughout New England, not the old England, but the new one, including his tenure as president of RICMA, which is the umbrella organization for the Muslim community in Rhode Island. He regularly speaks to audiences of hundreds throughout the US. He's also nearing completion of his PhD in religion at Harvard University and has received numerous traditional licenses, ijazat, to teach Islamic spiritual mentorship, jurisprudence, Quranic Arabic, and other subjects from master teachers in West Africa, Syria, and California. And about 3 weeks ago, he was on Blogging Theology telling his story from FBI career to Muslim Imam. That's the video. If you haven't seen it, please have a look. It's had over 100,000 views. It's well worth watching, I think. Today, though, Adnan will be sharing with us those books that have made a significant impact on his life and thinking. So, Adnan, over to you.
Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulil Kareem. In the name of God, the most deeply and widely merciful, peace and prayers be upon his messenger, and all praise to God, Lord of the worlds. Yeah, we're glad to move on to a little more moderate topic. I'll never escape my life story. The sensational, FBI agent to Muslim Imam. I'll never live that down. But alhamdulillah, I try to do more quiet, less sensational things these days. But like I said, glad to be here. And so correctional facilities as well, from your bio. I mean, we call them prisons here too, but correctional facilities is a euphemism. Right.
It's a euphemism you use. I see.
Of course, yeah, just to make everyone feel better about the United States having the highest rates of incarceration in the world. So,
gosh,
it is what it is.
Because you got a really lot of criminals in America, or you just like to lock them up a lot more than everywhere else?
Well, yeah, our government prefers to, I don't want to go off on that.
I don't want to go on that time.
Right. It is. Yeah, it's an unfortunate system of oppression in many ways. Yeah, many people deserve to be deserve consequences, but a real question should be how do we rehabilitate them? How do we bring them back into society? And America just does not do that well. And my heart goes out to a lot of the brothers and sisters, many of whom I've known and worked with, had the pleasure of working with over the years. Many of whom I haven't, who have spent time in correctional facilities, in prisons, and really a lot of really powerful da'wah, a lot of really powerful work and transformation happens specifically amongst the Muslims in the prison system here too.
Wow.
And it's been that case from Malcolm X onwards. You know, he came to Islam in prison himself, as did many. And so you wanted to talk today about... Is
that your first book, by the way, Malcolm X's book, his autobiography?
Yeah, Joe, I could mention that. I mean, that's an amazing read. I would highly recommend it to everyone.
Yeah,
and on the subject of books that have been foundational to me and just things I wanted to speak with you about today, I wish it went without saying, but the first thing I do have to mention is the Quran. That I wish it went without saying, because it would be completely taken for granted for us as Muslims, but it isn't. I know from my work in the community that there is such little engagement with the Quran these days, and this from the beginning was just reading the Quran. I think I mentioned the last time we talked how foundational that was for me, having experienced the Bible as a Christian,
Oh.
and knowing that there was so much truth and wisdom in there, but so much of it, I didn't feel like it spoke directly to me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas coming to the Quran, realizing that, wow, this speaks directly to me. It is literally addressing me time and time again. And it's the more you spend time with it, the more it just unfolds for you, and you realize how miraculous of a text this is, if you can even call it a text. So you mentioned that you mentioned in my bio, I spent time at Zaytuna. I was a member of the faculty for summer in the summer Arabic intensive, but was mainly a member of the staff as student life coordinator there, which then gave me the chance to audit some classes while I was there. So, for example, I took one course, Quranic Sciences, with Sheikh Yahya Rodas, and then a guest lecture that we had there for a few weeks was none other than the esteemed Ali Ata'i, may Allah preserve him. So that's where I first knew him from.
All right.
And his amazing scholarship, getting introduced to that. But one of the first things we went over in that class was the definition of the Quran, which many Muslims haven't heard from a classical perspective. The definition of the Quran, what is it? Well, it's kalam Allah, so the speech of God. Like, that alone blows your mind. The unified default of existence, the unified existence itself, could speak to us in a way that we could understand, but would not diminish its magnificence, his magnificence, and his splendor. It's just mind-blowing. So when I was in university doing my undergrad, that was when I came to Islam and started engaging with the Quran for the first time, really fell in love with it. And I chose my senior year, that last year of university, to do a thesis on pronominal reference in the Quran. So on the use of pronouns in the Quran. Because I remember reading the Quran for those first times, and it struck me, there's this thing that happens in the Quran called pronoun shift, iltifat, it's called technically in Arabic. Right. Sometimes God will be speaking. It'll speak about God as He, and then suddenly shift to I, and then we, as well as addressing other people. Suddenly it's addressing them, and then suddenly it's talking about them in the third person. And so after spending my last year at university just researching this and trying to come up with answers myself, just learn for myself, why is that? One of the key takeaways I took from that time was that the speech of God, it comes upon human speech and just smashes it open. So that God himself, in his own speech, he is he, we, you, I, all at the same time. Just completely, even the categories we have of grammatical person, first, second, third person, the speech of God comes in there and just smashes it open. And so back to the definition of the Quran, kalam Allah. So it's the speech of God. That alone, as I said, would just blow your mind. But then kalam Allah al-munazzalu ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that was revealed to the Prophet, peace be upon him. And so having the Quran then gives you this perspective into this exemplary life in this world, that the more you spend time with it, the more you feel like you're just living in the lifetime of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And that's an incredible healing, as the Quran calls itself, for all of us. So al-munazzalu ala nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam biwasitati wahi Jibril alayhi salam, by the intermediary of revelation, Angel Gabriel. Al-ma'bud bi talawati, so it's that which by its recitation is a form of worship. So for many of us, it's like a book, it's the best book for us as Muslims, but it's a book on the shelf that sometimes we engage with it, sometimes we don't. But the fact that just reading a single letter of this book is a form of worship. Just a single letter ranks as 10 good deeds, as we're told by the Prophet, peace be upon him. it's once again, it blows your mind how much elevation and spiritual progression can happen just by a little bit of engagement with this book. The definition goes on. So ma'bud bi tilawati, al-mu'jiz walau bi suratin min, that which is completely incapacitating. It's irreplicable. You can never replicate it, never do anything like it, even just a few verses. And so there have been so many esteemed guests you've had on your podcast here, Brother Paul, who have elucidated on that. And I've learned so much from that in terms of just increasing my knowledge on that point of just the miraculous nature of the Quran in terms of its historical accuracy, its scientific accuracy, linguistic accuracy, all of these things across languages, right? There have been guests you've had that have talked about or at least alluded to the Hebrew wordplay in this Arabic text. Right? So al-ma'bud bi tilawatihi, al-mu'jiz walau bi suratin min, al-manqulu bit-tawatur. It's been narrated down the generations by masses of people, which cannot be said about any other text in human history. From that first generation, you have so many people conveying this text from one generation to another that it's impossible to consider that it could have been fabricated, because it all matches up.
It's a shocking compare that with the New Testament, where there are absolutely no manuscripts at all from the first century. And I often ask Christians this question. They think, well, there must be manuscripts in the first. There are none, literally nothing. And even the second century, we have one tiny fragment, the John Rylands fragment. So there's very strong contrast with the Mutawatir, the mass transmitted Quran right from the beginning. And of course, that safeguard, it locks in that Quran. It can't be changed, because how could you change something that was known by so many, literally hundreds of thousands of people right from the beginning?
Right. Exactly. Right. Which then leads to the next point of the definition. Al-mahfuz min at-tahrif. It's preserved from ever being changed or altered. Even if you destroyed all the Qur'ans on the shelves, you'd still have millions of Muslims, myself included, alhamdulillah, who have it completely memorized in its entirety. And then finally, now also related to when you compare it to other scriptures like the New Testament, the definition typically ends with al-mabdu bil-Fatiha al-makhtum bin-Nas, that which begins with Surah al-Fatiha and ends with Surah al-Nas, i.e. we know exactly how it's ordered. We know where it begins and where it ends, which you can't say about any other sacred text. There's always discrepancy and disagreement over, well, is this book really here? Should this be part of it? Or we got the Apocrypha, and then disagreement over certain verses, and modern scholarship says we should take this verse out because it was clearly added in later, and all that.
The Trinity verse in 1 John 5:7, of course, is added much later by scribes. So it's not part of. There's no early manuscript that has it at all. Right. So that's a fake verse, and that's the Trinity, the only Trinity verse there is in the entire New Testament.
Right. So it's just so. With all that being said, even one single part of that definition should be enough for us as humans, as Muslims in particular, just to devote so much of our lives to it. And other scholars have said this before me. I would argue that if one is not reading at least a hizb, which is a half juz, so it's a 60th of Quran, so you complete the Quran in 2 months. If you're not reading at least a hizb of the Quran in Arabic a day, there's something wrong with your priorities at the end of the day. There's somewhere in which you've been deluded by this worldly life and what you think are the ways for you to conduct your life. And of course, everyone has their ramp up they need to have. You know, we as converts, English speaking converts, it takes us a while to learn the language and everything. I remember even after 4 years full time studying Arabic, I remember being in Damascus, and I would go to the mosque just down the street to pray Fajr. And then every day I could, most days, I would stay after Fajr. They had a Quran halaqah, a circle in which they would all recite Quran together. It would be me and mainly, a bunch of retired old men just in the masjid. And they'd been reciting the Quran for 6-7 decades.
Wow.
And here I am. Everyone does a half page,
Right.
and then the Imam would correct anyone if anyone made a mistake in recitation. And so I would sit down, and I remember counting the men around me, trying to calculate exactly where my place would be so I could prep it a bit, because I was so nervous about my fluency of reading Quran. But after that experience of just again and again, just gaining fluency just by practice every single day, then it comes and it flows, and it's this amazing state of flow you can enter into when you're engaging with the Book of God on a regular basis.
Well, those of us who don't have Arabic can still access the meanings of the Quran through translations. So we're not cut out from this revelation. We can still very much, and as I in the past, been inspired by like Yusuf Ali's translation, my favorite, very much inspired by that, without actually accessing the Arabic.
Right. But as our scholars would say, it's an individual obligation for every Muslim to be able to recite that Quran in Arabic. And then there's a disagreement over whether it is an individual obligation to understand all the words of the Arabic too. At the very least, spend time with that Arabic and then read a translation. But ideally, you'll be able to increasingly be able to understand exactly what you're reciting, because then that's when the real unveilings happen to you, when you can sit and reflect on the root meanings of many of these words that can really speak to you and your situation in this unique way. And just another miraculous aspect of the Quran, that it can speak to billions of people individually according to your own life circumstances. Yeah. And
sorry. Go on.
No, I was just gonna mention that I come from some of the teachers that I've learned from, specifically teachers in Senegal and Mauritania, that I spent time in communities where they pray Fajr, so they pray the first prayer of the day, and then they go to the teacher's house and complete a full recitation of Quran amongst them within like 20-30 minutes after that first prayer. Every single day they're completing that full recitation of Quran. Then there are special times during the year where there'll be times, be like a space of 5 days, where they see, okay, this small community of people under this particular teacher, how many complete entire recitations of Quran can they complete in these 5 days? And it's going to be in the hundreds with just a few dozen people. Yeah, it's profound, just the change that happened in my life, just from as the Quran says itself too. إنا أنزلناه قرآنا عربيا لعلكم تعقلون. That we revealed this as an Arabic Quran so that you could use your intellect. And I am witness, and I've seen it in other people's lives, that the more I engage with the Quran, the more it helps me just think straight and have the right conceptual categories for existence itself, for the world. But there's a lot more that can be said on that regard. Maybe we can go further on there in another conversation. But I just, whenever you ask about, if you're going to ask about like books that have been important to me, as I said, I wish it went without saying, but unfortunately, these days, we all, as a Muslim, have a responsibility to increase that average amount of engagement with the Quran that we have as a community.
Good. Okay. So apart from the Quran, which should be taken for granted, but it's not.
It should be, right.
What other books have been seminal influences on your life?
Yeah. So then I think two of pretty much all the works of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, may God have mercy on him. So particularly the works of Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences, and particularly amongst them the last book, The Remembrance of Death and the Afterlife, and then the book that's at the heart of that collection, Kitab Ajaib al-Qalb, the book of the Marvels of the Heart, book 21, delving into matters of the heart, matters of the spirit, but even beyond Ihya Ulumuddin, the revival of the religious sciences, which is 40 books collected in this magnum opus of Imam al-Ghazali. One of the books which has been foundational for me is his autobiography, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. I think I have it somewhere here. Yeah, think I have the translation. Let's see, al-Ghazali's Path to Sufism. That's what it's called. You know, everyone has their own definition of what Sufism means for them. So I would take issue with the title just because that concept Sufism can mean so many different things to so many different people. But as I understand it, you know, the path of Islamic spirituality according to the Quran and Sunnah. But the literal, and it's also the subtitle on this book is The Deliverance from Error, which is what he named the book, Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal. So the reason why that was foundational for me is because Imam al-Ghazali, may God have mercy upon him, he mentions his life story of growing up in 11th century, what is now Iran to us, Tus, and growing up. So he grows up as a child, an orphan. Ultimately, his father passes away. He and his brother are left entrusted to a local ascetic, and given that it's a local ascetic, he can't really provide for them much.
I can imagine his childhood was full of games and fun if he was being
Well, and so the inheritance money from his father runs out. And so this ascetic who's been entrusted with them has to provide for them, but can't provide for them. And so ends up sending them to madrasa, to an Islamic seminary. And so originally he enters Islamic seminary just out of need, out of poverty. Because it gave him food to eat and a bed and a roof over his head. But then he and his brother continue, they become very good at that seminary and continue to elevate, move on from institution to institution until finally they're at the Dar al-Nizamiya, the Nizamiya in Baghdad, the premier Islamic learning institution of that time, studying with the likes of Imam al-Juwayni, the amazing accomplished scholar. And then eventually Imam al-Ghazali becomes one of the youngest professors there, basically with what would be the modern equivalent of tenure at the most prestigious university most prestigious institution of learning in the Muslim world at that time. And the Muslim world was foremost in knowledge in general. So I'd argue the foremost institution of knowledge in the world at that time in many respects. And then he talks about in his biography having this strange thing happen to him where he starts having issues with speaking and eating.
Yes.
Suddenly he can't, he's stumbling, he's stuttering in his lectures, and he doesn't have an appetite anymore, and he can't figure out what's going on. So he goes to the doctors in Baghdad, which are the best of the world in that time. And they said, we can't figure out what's wrong with you. We can't figure out why you're losing weight, what is going on psychologically or physically, physiologically with you. The only answer is that there must be something more deep-seated than we can perceive through our methods. And so he realizes that there is this nagging question in the back of his mind of essentially, what am I doing with my life? How do I know what I know? And he starts deeply questioning himself, and it starts a period of several months where he talks about waking up in the day, in the morning, and saying, you know what, I'm gonna quit my job. I'm gonna leave academia here. I'm gonna move somewhere in the backwaters and just focus on my own spirituality and everything. There's something I need to figure out before my time comes up in this world. But then by the end of the day, all those voices would come in and say, well, oh no, like, you have this top job. Like, what are you going to give it up for just some dream? And that's folly. You don't want to do that. He says that was the voice of Satan coming to him and telling him not to do this, until finally he felt convinced. He says, he felt convinced that he was at the edge of a precipice, looking over the fire, about to fall in. And it's at that point he said, I can no longer do this, and I need to step away. And so he just makes this radical shift and steps away from his life and starts working on himself. And that, it's interesting, that could be where his story ends. Okay, this person reaches this pinnacle of status and privilege and knowledge in his society. And then he realizes what really matters in life is the state of his own heart, and he goes into seclusion for the rest of his life. And he's in that state for something like 8 to 10 years. But then he can't run from this fact that he feels he has this sacred mission that he feels a need to live out and not just be in hiding anymore. He needs to go back to teaching and writing, but in his own way. And in that biography, there's one line that always stuck out to me, where he pretty much gives what we in many kind of self-help or life coaching circles might call a why statement. He says his why statement in a book. He says, what is it? أدعو إلى الله أدعو إلى العلم الذي يترك به الجاه ويعرف به ذل رتبة الجاه أو كما قال. So he says, I seek to call to the kind of knowledge by which status is renounced and it becomes clear how lowly status is, the pursuit of status is. That's his mission in life. And so he feels a need to go back into teaching and writing. And in these last few years of his life, that's where he's at his most prolific. That's when he writes The Revival of Religious Sciences. That's when he writes almost all the books that he's really known for, and then passes away in his birthplace in Tours. He's invited back many times back to the Nizamiya in Baghdad, returns, I believe, at least once, but then realizes it's not for him. He needs to just be back in his hometown, set up a madrasa there, set up a seminary, and write. And so the reason why that was so foundational for me was because, and I think I alluded to this a bit in our last conversation, that for so many years after coming to Islam and then being woken up in a way because of Islam to the paltry nature, just the insignificant nature of what I felt was my mission in life, to be an FBI agent, right? Being for many years in that place of feeling like my sense of purpose was enough. My sense of my why, if you will, with respect to my creator was enough. Okay, I'm going to worship, I'm going to learn Quran, I'm going to increase in knowledge, serve the community in some way. But not having a specific mission in life, I suffered for many years feeling like that was where I needed to be. Oh, the dunya is just the dunya. This material world is just the material world. I'm going to be a little depressed. I don't like it here. It's a prison for the believer, as the Prophet said, peace upon him. And let me just kind of bide my time until it's my time to leave, and then I'm out. But then in reading, in coming back to the autobiography of Imam al-Ghazali in that regard, and seeing his path, and then reflecting on the story of prophets in the Quran, like one of the ones that sticks out most to me is Musa alayhi salam, the prophet Moses. Well, when he meets the burning bush, he gets two messages, essentially. It's not just inni an Allah fa'budni wa aqimis salata li dhikri, as narrated in the Quran. Verily, I am God, so worship me and establish the prayer for my remembrance. But he's also told, idhhab ila fir'auna innahu tagha. Go to Pharaoh, indeed he is an oppressor. So he's given a sense of purpose and he's given a sense of mission. And the more I looked into this, first reflecting on the autobiography of Imam al-Ghazali, and then just on the narrations from the prophets and the righteous, just realizing, oh, wait, this is what we're supposed to be as believers. We're supposed to not only have a sense of purpose, but also have this drive for a particular mission, a particular way in which Allah has created me to be of service to the rest of creation. And I need to figure that out before it's too late, and before I just kind of give up on life, which I found over the years now is where lots of especially like young professional Muslim brothers and sisters, where a lot of them I find they are just that sense of like, yeah, I'm just getting through it, just kind of waiting for my time, and don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just trying to worship Allah. That's not good enough. I thought that was good enough for me for many years, and then it's engaging with works like this, literature like this, that I realized this lesson from a millennium ago plus that there is better, and we should be looking for better. So that's another work which has been foundational for me, is Imam al-Ghazali's autobiography, but then just in general, all of his works as works which are the product of someone who mastered the external sciences, but was also very attentive to, and often in a very humorous way. It's really entertaining reading his works, actually, that also attentive to matters of the heart and matters of what really matters most. It's not this external performance and getting that all right. That is a path, that is a means to perfecting what's going on inside.
Gosh, extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, the only, I mean, I haven't read all his works, certainly not to the extent that you have, but a similar kind of autobiography that affected me a long time ago was a book by St. Augustine in the 5th century called The Confessions. It's a confession of praise as well as a confession of sin. It has a dual meaning. But it was very autobiographical and very much a kind of psychological journey that he underwent, and a spiritual one from unbelief to belief as he saw it. But and there was no humor in that. I don't recall any humor, actually. But rather serious all the way through it. But I remember one thing I found funny unintentionally was when he was complaining about the behavior, because he taught in Rome for a while as an eminent academic like al-Ghazali, a star of his generation. And he complained, this is the 5th century AD, during the last parts of the Roman Empire, how unruly and badly behaved students were, unlike in the good old days when students were very well behaved. And I'm thinking, hang on, you're writing this 1,500 years ago, and we're still saying exactly the same thing today. I thought that was hilarious. Although he didn't. But he did. The good old days, people were well behaved, and not now in the 5th century AD. Really. Yeah. Nice. But that apparently is the first, but many people say this is the first autobiography in the West, where someone is consciously writing about their own life story, and it's still really worth reading today. Although it was written from a Christian perspective, I think it has universal interest because it's a journey of a human being from antiquity, and you get a sense of immediacy and participating in his own retelling of the journey through this extraordinary book. And yeah, it's very influential in the West as well, still today, I think. Yeah. But, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend Muslims to read it, particularly unless you had an obscure interest in ancient Roman biographies or autobiographies. Yeah.
No worries. Well, yeah, I mean that stories of human, human psychology and human character, they're always beneficial as well.
Yeah, I mean, he had a real sense of the influence of the unconscious on human behavior. And this anticipates Freud, of course. I mean, he didn't have this scientific paradigm, but he was very much aware of the significance of the unconscious in our behavior and motivation. And this was probably the first time in recorded history that someone spoke like that of human behavior and psychology about himself. And so it was particularly interesting, I thought, for that reason. So what would be your next desert island book, so to speak?
Next would be, I think, more just like for Imam al-Ghazali, there was one book which is really influential for me, but really, if I could, I'd want to take all of his works with me to that desert island. Next is similar in terms of a different figure now, 900 years later, figure by the name of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse of Senegal. So Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse is arguably the most influential Muslim scholar in Africa in the 20th century. His people who benefited from him, students of his, are numbered in the tens of millions in that area and beyond. And I've benefited from his works, but also just his life story is fascinating, and it's been so beneficial for me as a Muslim now living 1400 years after the Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and thinking about our engagement with the world and with all the realities of the world that we have to navigate. So the Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse was born in the early 20th century, died in 1975. Actually, he passed away at St. Thomas's Hospital in London.
Oh, really?
Places. Yeah. So there are students of his that actually visit that room to this day where he passed away. And the room he passed away in I've actually been there once before too. it has a view to the Parliament building.
The House,
right?
the House of Commons, literally across the Thames on the other side of the river.
And he knew, he gave indications to his students when he left on that flight. As far as I understand, he'd never been to England before. He'd been to France, but not to England. This was his first flight to England, seeking medical treatment in London. Right. And he gave indications to his students that he said, "I'm not coming back." Basically, he could feel that this was his last trip, and he passed away in London. But anyway, so he's born in Senegal, and he was raised going to the madrasa, to the seminary of his father, Al-Hajj Abdullahi Niasse. Right. And so he learnt traditionally, in terms of how many of those early generations of Muslims and Muslim scholars in particular learned, just studying with one teacher, studying texts over a few decades, not necessarily going to a particular university, getting a degree, diploma or anything, but really just sitting at the feet of scholars. That was his formative experience. And yet then after that, he becomes a luminary in his context, and then eventually, very quickly actually, on the international stage as well. So he then lived at this time, which was this transitional moment from the colonial period to the post-colonial period in Africa, especially, and was influential in many ways along that transition for many different Muslim and even non-Muslim leaders. So he was at one point the vice president of the Muslim World League, which was founded in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Was also part of the Muslim World Congress in Karachi, and then part of the Institution for Islamic Research, or something that the Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser started. So engaged in these pan-Islamic, international Islamic organizations, and then had really interesting relationships with many Muslim and non-Muslim leaders. So in West Africa, it was in West Africa, in either Guinea or Ghana, that he met with the chairman of the Communist Party in the USSR at the time, Leonid Brezhnev. And also President Tito of Yugoslavia was there. So several really staunch secular atheists were at that meeting in West Africa, because everyone was vying for influence as these countries were coming to be independent. And there's a famous story from his time there that one of the Soviet leaders asked Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, so you're a Muslim, and we're atheists, we don't believe in religion.
We're communists.
What do you have to say to us in terms of, like, are we antagonists? Do we work together? And he said, his response was, look, the likeness of the world today is like a village where everyone gathers in the center of the village, in the town, in the square, the village square, to cooperate during the day and to work on beneficial projects for the whole community. And then when we go home, all of us returns to our home place where our heart is. He said that's the likeness of the world today, is that we have this public square, which is the arena of cooperation and mutual benefit. And then we also have our private, personal religious commitments. Now, he says this in a context in which it's not, he's saying it from the perspective of a traditional Muslim scholar who's not operating under this bifurcation of religion and secular as we have in the modern West, but really from a sense of, okay, this is the modern world. This is how we engage as Muslims. And so he has just really interesting engagements with world leaders. He was invited and ultimately visited Chairman Mao of China, was brought there on a state visit. He also met with President Roosevelt. There's a picture of him with President Roosevelt at the end of World War II, when they had a conference in Africa. And then had a really strong relationship with many Muslim leaders, local and outside of the time. So Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt in particular Gamal Abdel Nasser, he felt threatened by this nascent movement called the Muslim Brotherhood, and led by Sayyid Qutb at the time. And so Sayyid Qutb was imprisoned. Gamal Abdel Nasser made the decision he's going to execute Sayyid Qutb. Shortly before the execution of Sayyid Qutb is going to go through, a letter arrives on his desk from Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse.
Wow.
And President Nasser turns to his associates and says, "So this letter is from Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse. I know what he's written in the letter. And I fear going against the advice of the Sheikh. So I'm not going to open the letter until I execute Sayyid Qutb."
Is that right?
Because he knew that Sheikh Ibrahim was writing in defense of Sayyid Qutb, saying, "Do not do this. Do not do this." And there are other stories saying of when Gamal Abdel Nasser was arranging an army to stand up to the Zionists. Sheikh Ibrahim wrote to him and said, "I'll commit my family to you. We'll send people to you." But Gamal Abdel Nasser said, "No, I want this to be an Arab thing, not a Muslim thing." And so he was an advisor in many ways to many Muslim dignitaries. And then it was the founding president of Guinea, Sekou Touré, who had a relationship with Sheikh Ibrahim. And Sekou Touré ultimately survived a coup attempt in those early years of independence, and he himself attributed Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse's prayers for his ability to survive that coup attempt. And so these just a few narrations from his story. But so he was someone who engaged on the world stage as an unapologetic Muslim, but still and had that ability to engage with world leaders, no matter what their engagement with religion was personally, and even on a state level, but also too held this dignity of the Muslim scholar in particular, or just Muslims in general, and much of that is encapsulated in his lines of poetry. So I would definitely want to bring his poetry along. Right. In one poem of his, it's a travelogue, so he narrates his journey heading east in the Muslim world, and they have a stopover in Rome. And he says in one line, he says, "قالوا تزور الباب لو داراني حقا لا هرول إلا بستاني." They said to me, "Why don't you visit the Pope? You're here in Rome. Why don't you visit the Pope?" So he says in this line of poetry, they say to me, "Why don't you visit the Pope?" But if he truly knew me, he would race to serve in my fields.
Gosh.
I.e., saying that this is the dignity of the Muslim, and the Muslim scholar in particular. These other religious figures think they have all this pomp and circumstance and the wealth and everything. I mean, it's the Pope, like basically a king for many Christians. And if he realized what was really going on, he would realize that doing khidmah, doing service to a person of knowledge would be better for him than standing at this status of being this leader dressed in robes in his palace in the Vatican. And then, so in his poetry too, I love his poetry because it's this classical Arabic poetry that then has so many modern references to it that really speak to, I find it, to my situation, the situation of the modern world. So another few good lines of his that have always stuck with me are تمسك بأذيال النبي متابعا مذاهبه المحدثات فلا فما نابليون أو لينين وماركس بموحى إليهم خلي عنك خبالا. He says, hold fast to the coattails of the Prophet, following his way. As for innovated matters, no, just leave them. Because neither Napoleon, nor Lenin, nor Marx received revelation. So forget that nonsense. So commenting specifically on Marxism and many of the great theories of the day and everything, and then one more, I am kind of going off on a tangent, but if I could share just one more line that I love in this regard. Also commenting on political aspects. He talks about, he mentions President Nixon in one line, and says, what's the line? Wa tuhniku rijsan wa huwa Nixon wa khayyiban lahu amalan wa tukhzihi amrahu akhzi. He says, he's making a supplication, and he says, and may you destroy a filth. And he says the word for filth that he uses in Arabic is rijsan, which sounds, it's very close to Richard. Richard. So he says, destroy a rijsan, and he's Nixon.
Wow.
So it's amazing, amazing cross-linguistic wordplay that he includes in this line of traditional Arabic poetry.
That's very clever.
And this is a common thing he does throughout his poetry, is taking modern words, terminology, names of places and things, and connecting them to Arabic roots if you Arabicize those words. So Richard and Rijsan being one example of that. But if I were, the reason his work really appeals to me is, as I said, someone who grew up trained traditionally, just sitting at the feet of scholars, and yet becomes this accomplished leader, Muslim intellectual, anti-colonialist in many ways, African theorist in many ways. When he visits al-Azhar in Cairo, reportedly they give him the title Sheikh al-Islam, and honor him and have him lead the Jummah rather than the scholars at al-Azhar. So he's acknowledged as a scholar in his own right, as a really accomplished Muslim scholar in many ways. But then also, too, his whole point of many of his works is just returning to that core of what is this tradition about? It's about knowledge of God at the end of the day. It's about an intimate, personal experience of the divine, which completely obliterates your own ego and allows you to see the truth as it is, not filtered through the bifurcation of the human ego. And so his main work, main prose work, called The Removal of Confusion. That's how it's translated in the English. I think it's widely available with in translation, or in the Arabic, Kashf al-Ilbas. That has been foundational for me, and just in terms of, once again, like Imam al-Ghazali, restoring the heart of this whole thing and the point of this whole thing, which isn't just about praying right and fasting right and reciting Quran right and all of that. I mean, those are means to ma'rifah, essentially, to direct experiential knowledge of God himself. That's what it prepares us for.
Extraordinary. Yeah, I must read more about him, actually. I think the only equivalent for me that I found extremely impressive, his life and work, would be Ilya Izbegovic. He was the president of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And, he's written many books. Islam Between East and West is probably his most famous one, which is still worth today. A political figure, a Muslim, a white Muslim, a European Muslim, of course, a man of integrity who met lots of leaders, who had a great facility with words, particularly these maxims, these utterances he came up with, which are still tweeted, I've noticed, even today. So his influence endures, even so. Gosh, that's very, very interesting. Can I? What about fiction? Do you resonate with fiction? Do you read fiction, the great works of literature, at all?
I as a schoolboy growing up, I kind of did the required reading, and I think fiction is something I personally, ever since coming to Islam, have felt such a scramble to take on everything I possibly can and retain it, and try to connect dots and everything within the Islamic tradition that's so vast that when I have time to read, I try to focus on books of traditional Islamic knowledge and interpretations thereof. And so I don't find myself reading much fiction these days, but my guilty pleasure is action movies. And so sometimes action movies cause me to return to certain narratives. Like I recently reread Dune, just a few months ago.
Oh, is that worth reading? I mean, I've never read it. So is it a great book?
It's a great book. It's also a great book to read as a Muslim and as someone who knows a bit of Arabic, because there's so many. Frank Herbert, I think the author, he'd clearly spent time learning Arabic, and so much of his references are Islamic or Arabic in that work. And so it's just, you just laugh at certain points using terms like lisan al-ghaib and Sharia and things like that.
Well, he uses the word Sharia even. Oh gosh.
Yeah. I think that might be
in the movies. I don't think he uses that word. Doesn't appear in the movies. I mean, the recent famous one.
Yeah, I've heard people talk about they downplay the Islamic and Arabic references in the movie, but still, it's not completely downplayed. I mean, people they use the word Mahdi and lisan al-ghaib.
But isn't the? I mean, I haven't read the book, but isn't the Mahdi? Doesn't he? I saw an interview with the author once. It's on YouTube actually, and, but it's kind of a warning about the dangers of these charismatic leaders. The Mahdi isn't he a bad figure ultimately? But in the Islamic tradition, he's not. He's a warrior for truth and righteousness.
Of course, I mean that's why. Yeah, I hesitate in terms of engaging with fiction just in general, because they're often the message that you get from it only comes from spending so much time reading it, and then it's like, well, did I really want that message in my life? Right. So there are several ways to read Dune. One key way to read Dune is to see that it's a warning against messianical figures or Mahdi-like figures. But there's also wisdom to take from that. You know, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said that after him there would be many false prophets. And many people over the years, and specifically over the last few decades, have come out and claimed to be the Mahdi or claimed to be the Messiah reincarnate. And so there is still wisdom to take in terms of being cautious in all those regards, and from those claims, and how that can really delude people and delude even those people who are making those claims.
What about the books, not from the Islamic tradition, but from a non-Muslim Western tradition, books about politics or philosophy, or poetry or anything like that? Is that something that you don't engage with at the moment? Obviously, you're very focused on the Islamic tradition, but is that something you have engaged with at all?
Yeah. Well, there have been a few books that have been really provocative and foundational for me. So there are books that kind of dovetail with my PhD research, which is subject for another day. So books such as the works of Hans Urs von Balthasar, Catholic theologian, who wrote about the importance of basically his whole argument in like a 500-page book. It's a very thick volume, but his whole argument is that you can't talk about God without using poetry. If you really want to talk about God, you need to use beautiful form to talk about the beautiful substance of God at the end of the day. He also has another set. So that whole argument actually goes over 7 volumes of his work. And then he has another set of volumes on what's called theodrama. So the importance of why dramatic story needs to be a way that you speak about God. So specifically when engaging with poetry, like the poetry I was just quoting a bit from of Sheikh Ibrahim Niasse, that's really helped me consolidate thoughts on why do so many Muslims, and particularly Muslim scholars throughout the generations, use Arabic poetry to talk about the divine? What is there, and why would that be? And so the work of Hans Urs von Balthasar has been helpful in just understanding that, and just also from a personal perspective of why is it important to engage in poetry and in things that are of beautiful form, and not when talking about substance, which is ultimate beauty itself.
No, I agree.
And then so there are works that delve into the kind of things that I do for my PhD research, and then there are works that delve into the kind of things that I find myself working in the community on. So like self-help genre books, which are often looked down upon, but I still benefit a lot from. So, for example, Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I read that 2 years ago, and that was when these thoughts were starting to really come together for me in terms of reflecting on the autobiography of Imam al-Ghazali, and thinking about the people I knew, many young people in the community who were really struggling with that sense of sacred mission, if you will. After reading Simon Sinek's work, Start With Why, and hearing his whole argument of the importance for us as humans of having that why statement for ourselves, I realized that, we as Muslims, we need to do a better job of being in this genre, which is in such need today. And as so many people are thirsting after, in just terms of help getting their life together. That we from the Quran and from the Islamic spiritual tradition, there are so many lessons which can be broadly applicable just to people who haven't engaged with Islam at all. And so that has been foundational for me in terms of inspiring me to work on some of the things I currently work on in the community, just trying to be a voice in that regard, filling in the blanks that works like Simon Sinek's leaves ultimately. Because Simon Sinek in that book, Start With Why, he mentions himself like this: finding your why, finding your mission is the easy part. The hard part is staying true to it. And he doesn't really explain how to do that. But we in the Islamic tradition, we know that. We know who our internal enemies are. Nafs, hawa, shaitan, as I like to say it, the foes, F-O-E-S, feelings, outcomes, ego, and Satan. We know who those are. We know how they act. We know how to defend ourselves against them. We just need to do the work and raise the awareness
to do that. And it's tried and tested for over 1,000 years.
Right.
I think in that regard, the only book that I still treasure really is by an American psychiatrist called The Road Less Traveled. That book is a psychiatrist, but he's not a materialist. He very much believes in the spiritual journey, and it's the famous first sentence of the book: "Life is difficult," and then he expands on that. So it's a very realistic book, but it's about how to love, how to be spiritual. I mean, he's writing as a Christian, but not in any narrow sense at all. It's a very Catholic with a small c, expansive understanding of spirituality. And I think with poetry as well, I've been very affected over the years by the metaphysical poets. These are English poets of the 17th century, people like John Donne, Marvel, and others, George Herbert, and even another Anglo-American, T.S. Eliot, in the 20th century. He won the Nobel Prize for literature. The Four Quartets is one of my most favorite books, a profoundly spiritual poem. You mentioned von Balthasar, the importance of expressing spiritual truth and talking about God in poetry. T.S. Eliot was a master of that in the Four Quartets and a few other works as well, which have reached a global audience. Extraordinary work of art. So I can certainly identify with that. What you're saying. Do you have any? I mean, we've been talking for now. I don't want to exhaust you. I know you've just come from another meeting as well. But is there anything else you wanted just to mention in conclusion? Any other works that to top this off, or shall we?
Well, sure. I mean, we could go on and on about all kinds of works that have been foundational for me. But one other thing that comes to mind, when you're on that last topic of books outside of the Islamic tradition per se, and I was talking about self-help books. A book I found really beneficial, continue to find really beneficial, and continue to return to, is a book by Ian Morgan Cron and Susan Stabile called "The Road Back to You," which is an elaboration on the Enneagram personality typing, and so I kind of have a personal interest in uncovering a bit of the history of the Enneagram, because I think there's a lot of resonance that it has, that personality typing, beyond any other personality typing strategy. A lot of resonance with our understanding as Muslims, with our perspective informed by the Quran and prophetic guidance of who we are and how we engage with the world. Ultimately, that we, before this world, we had a life before this world in which we were in the presence of God and we acknowledged it. But then we're placed in this world and suddenly have this experience of duality, of multiplicity, in which suddenly there's my will and there's other wills that are conflicting, and I have to deal with that. And then the ego is then built from that experience of having an experience of multiplicity, in which I am one of many now, and other people don't. There are these conflicting wills, and so that's a naturally painful experience. And so with that pain, we have three basic reactions to that pain. We either get sad about it and long for what we once had deep down, that we know deep down inside there was a life before this life when things were so hard, so painful. Or we get mad about it. So we get angry that we're in this life and that there are other wills, and I need to assert my will against theirs and that kind of thing. Or we get scared about it. Oh no, what does this mean? Like, what can I fend for myself? Can I survive in this world of multiple wills and that kind of thing? And that's what and so when I've just delved a bit into the Enneagram, that can explain the bifurcation of the personality typing. Ultimately, there are these three foundational reactions to pain, and then there are three ways in which you could deal with any one of those reactions. You can either internalize it, put it on yourself, externalize it, put it on other people, or dissociate from it and pretend like it's not an issue when it really is your core issue. And that informs then the 9 Enneagram types. And so I've found just for myself, and then also just helping many others in the community, I found that model of personality typing to vibe so well with what we understand of existence as Muslims, and to help us navigate and understand how Hawa, how that enemy of feelings, which we're warned about in the Quran, manifests for us, our proclivities towards certain things in this world.
Gosh, absolutely fascinating. Well, that's what we'll leave it there, Adnan. Thank you so much. And next time, in our next podcast, God willing, we'll talk much more about your PhD research, which is of great interest to Muslims and others, I think. Absolutely fascinating area. We won't go into it now. We'll save that for another day, God willing. But in the meantime, thank you so much. I think you and I would both agree that it's so important just to read books, good books, of course, and that this is an enduring treasure that we've been given. And there's so many wonderful books out there, whether it be literature or other kinds of work, that we should. It's a lifetime's journey, and one can never read them all, of course. But there are so many beautiful, wonderful books that can be life-transforming experiences, like the books you mentioned, not least books of revelation, like the Quran supremely itself, which is certainly a transforming experience reading that. Ever new, ever fresh, changing in a sense. It's never stale, never the same. So yeah, books should be ideally a central part of our life's journey that accompany us through our lives. And change us as well in the process. So it's one of those wonderful things about being able to read, I think. So thank you very much indeed, Adnan. Absolute pleasure. Always a privilege talking to you. And God willing, we'll talk again, inshallah. So until next time, Assalamu alaikum.
Sounds good. Wa alaikum assalam. Been a great pleasure on my part, Brother Paul, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Until then.